I've given a name to my pain. The Batman.
Always waiting for some Batman to save you.
It's simple. We kill the Bat of Gotham. You don't really think you'll win, do you? I'm Batman.
Hello and welcome to episode 125 of the Batman on Film podcast. BOF is the sponsor as well as a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network. Check out all the shows over at batmanpodcastnetwork.com and follow our Twitter at BatPodNetwork. If you're listening to us on iTunes, if you take the time to rate and review the show, we'll read it on the air. And Batman on Film is also now on Patreon. If you like what we do here at BOF, whether it's the podcasts, vlogs, or the website itself, and you want to help support us, if you're so inclined, please head over to patreon.com/BatmanOnFilm and sign up. I am the host of today's episode, Ryan Hoss, and with me today is my BOF brother, Justin Kowalski. How are you doing, dude?
I'm doing fantastic right now. I'm doing great.
What is your real middle initial?
Oh, M.
Justin M. Kowalski.
If I was
made
a writer,
it a K.
If I was a writer, I would be J.M. Kowalski.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. Well, we have a great topic today, dude.
Yeah, we do.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. We need to get into the secret origin of this topic, or someone's going to lose their
We
mind.
will. We're gonna get So instead of doing individual whatever, we have two very high grade mint condition BOF pals with us tonight. We
CGC rated.
CGC 9.8. We don't have any. Nobody.
We're talking about Chris.
We're
talking about Chris.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair.
We have Chris, Clow, and Paul Hermann with us tonight. How are you doing, dudes?
Oh, good. This was kind of a last-minute thing. I drove out from the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin just...
Why did you have to reveal that, Chris? Why are you showing too much behind the curtain, man? You're not supposed to say that. It's supposed to be like, man, I've been preparing for this show for like 3 weeks.
Well, but really, I mean, I talk about this kind of topic literally every week, so you could say I've been preparing for it for
my whole life.
7 years.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Wow. All right.
Well, you know what? In that case...
We need a montage now of just Chris reading.
Montage.
He's watching.
Reading comics, watching lots of stuff. Comics and movies, are they one and the same? Not really.
Ooh, that's good. That's good. That's good.
I like it.
You just won. You just won Twitter with that.
Oh man!
All right.
Well, today's topic was born of the Twitter, and it's pretty much Paul's fault. And this whole show is kind of came out of a little conversation that he started. And he got into this thread about it, and I said, "Dude, this is a show," and I wasn't really joking at all. I was like, "Maybe he'll take the bait." And he's like, "Oh, let's do a show," and I'm like, "Yes."
Doesn't take much. Let's be real.
So,
hey, Paul, you want to talk about like super? Yes.
You don't do a podcast about it. So this whole podcast has to do with the art of adaptation, and I was gonna let Paul kind of break this down because you have this thread on Twitter that kind of starts this whole deal.
Right. So the thread came from someone asking me about like, do you think the death of Captain America? And I think it's Pete Illustrated, right, from Twitter.
Yeah, Pete Vera.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what Pete Illustrated is. Isn't that his Twitter name?
Yes.
See, I want to make sure he gets credit so people can follow him. Follow him, Pete Illustrated. But he had he kind of said, "Do you think the death of Captain America would be a good thing for film?" And I said, "No, there's no way. It's too complicated." And I said some things will work for comics in the film, and I started kind of going off on that a little tangent. And some of it's very obvious. I want to make that very clear. Like obviously, adaptations from into film from anything, whether it be novels or whatever, TV even, it's going to be different, right? Because you've got literally 2.5 hours of time to tell a complete story, and that's not easy. And with comic books, the reason why I think it's a little bit different is because you literally have the blueprint like there, like it's literally You have all the action beats.
Storyboards.
Yes, exactly. Your storyboards. That's the difference between comics and novels, and how it's interesting how comic books are adapted into film based on that reason alone, and how much, time you have to develop characters and things like that. Because comic books can be very dense. It cannot be complicated. So you can tell a lot in 6 issues that maybe you could do in a 2.5 hour movie or things like that, or whatever, or take, different elements. And so it just it got me thinking about adapting superheroes into films from comic books specifically. So, and I'm obviously a huge lover of the comic book medium. And I've been, when I was even, back when I wasn't even reading comics as much when I was in high school, my friends would always knew I was a comic book guy because I read comics for a long time before that. And they'd always go, well, how is this? Like, how does X-Men 2, differ or whatever? And I'm like, well, they could, and I start kind of going into it a little bit because I was a big X-Men guy before I got out of comics. And so I kind of, went into it because I've always had an idea of oh, this is not a good adaptation, or this characterization is this or that. It's very interesting because with novels, you're going to leave out always a ton of stuff. Now, that's not always the case with comic books. Sometimes they borrow from multiple facets, like the MCU does, right?
Oh yeah.
They borrow literally Infinity Wars, Infinity Gauntlet, and the Infinity storyline could chunk together. And again, but they're really faithful to what they're doing for the most part at the same time. So there's this it's really interesting that you can do that with the source material of comic books and everything. And it's not with novels, you have huge chunks where it's well, just cut that out and cut that out. I mean, look at Lord of the Rings, right? I mean, those are amazing adaptations, but they took out giant things of it. Whereas,
so they can fit a narrative that fits 2.5 hours. And
where you
Harry
have
Potter, that's a good example too.
Yeah, you have a narrative with comic books, and it's very direct. It's not like you have to, Batman, Spider-Man, Superman. Their characters aren't going to change by the end of the film. They're not going to be always completely different people, and that's not always a bad thing. So that's good for adapting into a film. So I'm really excited to talk about this, obviously.
Yeah. One of my favorite adaptations is Watchmen, because it was the impossible, it was daunting. There was a lot of people, their ideas, it should be a 12 episode HBO series, which I think that would be fantastic. That's not what we're getting. It's
about to be.
Well, I think we're getting after.
It's its own thing. It's its own thing.
It's a sequel.
It's a sequel. Yeah, it's the New Testament is what they have said it is. But I think what Zack Snyder did with that film was great. Even the ending. Yes. I think I like the ending better. I think it's a strong example of here's what you take the spirit of what it is. No pun intended. The spirit. Hey! You take the spirit of what it is and you treat everything with respect, especially the fans. I think in an adaptation, you got to cater to your fan base because they're the ones that are going to give you that good word of mouth. I'm a big believer in general audience. Who cares? We cater so much to the general audience. Yeah, you know.
Yeah,
I just feel like the general audience, I have never understood that angle of thought. Oh, well, the general audience needs to understand it. I'm like, well, they've never seen this. We're presenting them what we want them to see. And I feel like they make choices that, as a fan, you're like, why didn't they start with Gwen Stacy? Why did they start with MJ? Things like that are, I guess you can go, oh, well, MJ, she's, more of a household name because of cartoons or whatever. But I feel like there's rules to adaptation, especially in the comic book sector of making movies. I don't know if you guys follow that, or
are there some I would say there's some guidelines, but
guidelines,
not necessarily rules you must follow.
The rules are there to break, but overall, you have to understand. You have a you have a built-in audience, and especially comic book people are going to be super passionate about the things you do, the changes you make, and so I think you do. I think there is a responsibility to not tiptoe, but to know, hey, I'm going to go in, I'm going to make this story. I love Batman. I'm going to put Batman through the ringer, and then this is where he's going to be when he comes out of it. Along the way, I'm going to pull, from some of these stories that I loved, and I think that totally works because we're never going to get a movie based on, Cataclysm, right? We're not going to get the Cataclysm story. I don't know if anyone wants to watch the earthquake, story.
We're gonna get that in Gotham next season.
Well,
Wow.
There we go. But you see what I'm saying? I think.
Yeah. So I think
but
yeah.
There are parts where Ryan's just like, I gotta get in. I think there is a responsibility when you say, hey, I'm going to enter this world and I'm going to craft a story about this character, that you have to know what are the things that, and I guess maybe sometimes it's fun to twist things and break things, but you kind of have to say, Alfred's always going to be the English butler, right? Yeah. As soon as you make him like, Australian, it's weird, right? Like I'm trying to. Sorry, I got a dog in the background.
No, right.
Yeah, so just I guess take that and run with it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think there's two divergent paths from here, right? I mean, in terms of adaptations, you're either adapting something, a singular story like Watchmen, or you're taking bits and pieces of things like for The Dark Knight Rises, for example, you've got parts of Nightfall and No Man's Land, combined in there, and Dark Knight Returns even combined in there. And I think you have two branches, and each of those have different connotations in terms of how fans would react or how the weight of reactions, right? So like Watchmen, it's more about the story. It's more about, did you adapt the story properly? And if it's something like Dark Knight Rises or any of these stories that take, bits and pieces of a bunch of stories, it's more about the characters, because the characters are always just going to kind of be the driving force there. And I think that's kind of the thing. And when you were talking about like, how often do you break the rules and how often do you change characters and things? I think for me, when I'm watching something, like if you're going to take the time to break the rules completely or do something very like off the beaten path, it needs to have purpose and reason behind it. It needs to be like the thing that the movie's about or something, and it can't just seem like, oh, I just wanted to do this weird thing in this movie just because I thought it would be cool. I'm like, a good example I think would be like, would be Logan, right? Like, there's not a lot of superhero movies like that have an ending like that, or a setup like that. But that was the movie, and that's the only kind of movie you can do when you have a franchise that's been built up for that many years, where you can do this kind of future. It takes place in the future, and you can have this finite kind of ending, and that's the movie. So I think there's a lot of ways you can go about it. It just has to be done well.
When bringing a character in, like let's go Iron Man 2. You have Crimson Dynamo mixed with Paul, jump in here.
Well, hold on. I wanted to make sure Chris got his word in on this really fast.
Whiplash, right?
Yes. Sorry, I was like, when I wanted to make an example. Like when I watched that, it didn't bug me because I don't have this huge affinity for Whiplash or Crimson Dynamo, but they merged them together. Like, for what do you guys? How did that make you feel? Because for me, I was like, okay, I didn't care too. I was indifferent, I guess. Well,
for me, really fast is that I don't really care because he's not a really huge character.
Yeah.
Even for Iron Man was not that's kind of benefited from Marvel basically because Iron Man has a small or had a decent fan base, but it wasn't like the level of Spider-Man, Batman, or Superman or anything like that. But that's the thing. Like you're when you're dealing with those kinds of things, no one's going to care you're putting characters together or anything like that. But yeah, I think that's the thing. You don't have to, if you're not dealing with a really prized thing, you're not really have to worry.
There's more leeway.
Yeah, exactly. So, but really fast, Chris, get in here. What's your take on adaptations, homie?
Oh man, I don't really know where to start.
Been preparing so many years for this.
Well,
can you just adapt your thoughts?
Well, tell him to Paul, and Paul will adapt them.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, don't start with me.
Ryan, you kind of alluded to it. I mean, narrative fiction, narrative art in its most basic forms can be bisected into two elements. You have plot and you have characters. And by and large, most of the successful iterations of comic book movies are far more truthful to character than to plot. Because, like you guys alluded to, you pick and choose from a bunch of different stories. I think probably the best example of how well that can work is in Batman Begins. Just because Batman Begins took elements. I mean, you expect it to take from year one. Year one is the easy choice for depicting the beginning of Batman, right? But it also took from 80s stories like The Man Who Falls. And there are aspects of Long Halloween and Dark Victory. Long Halloween and Dark Victory, there are pieces of that in all three of the Nolan Batman films. But it's probably most pronounced, at least with Long Halloween, and some of the more Genesis elements for Batman in Batman Begins. And the reasoning for that is because you have these characters that have withstood for decades, and at the moment that the adaptation is created, the character means a specific thing. Not that Batman is going to mean something different in 10 years or 20 years, but there's a certain point where the filmmakers have to sort of take the temperature of where the character sits, what the priorities are, how his voice sounds in the source material, and try and push that forward into their adaptation. And most of the best comic book movies take that approach. I mean, whether you want to cite the original X-Men film, which was, the one that kicked off this sort of golden age of comic book movies that we have now, or Batman Begins, or Spider-Man 2, or The Avengers. I mean, whichever ones you want to take, it is not a straight adaptation of a story. Because it's valuable to adapt the sort of truthful elements of the characters, and I think the pivotal aspect of it, particularly in 2000, but probably mostly starting in 2005, you had filmmakers who came along who began to care about getting input from the people who told stories with these characters in the comics. Because in previous years, you had these movie makers come in and say, I'm going to take a beloved superhero and I'm going to tell a story better than comic book creators did. And they didn't outright say that, but the implications seem to be that. I think Tim Burton is a perfect example, or more specifically, Daniel Waters is a perfect example with his approach in Batman Returns. And there was almost this disdain for the source material. It's like they tried to divorce the pop culture iconography of a superhero from the stories that have been told for, by that point, 50 years with Batman, thereabouts, almost 60 years. And you just can't do that. And what you get is, for lack of a better term, and it's going to sound a little hyperbolic, but what you get is a bastardization of the character as he appeared in the source material. And that's why Batman Returns certainly has its segment of devoted, passionate fans, but those devoted, passionate fans also...
I heard Bill loves that movie.
Yeah.
But I know that Justin likes that movie too, but Justin, I don't think that you would necessarily contend that Batman as depicted in Batman Returns is the guy that you know from the comics that you read every week.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, our enjoyment of a movie like that can come from a sense of nostalgia. It can come from a sense of connection. It can come from a sense of being introduced to the world of comics or comics characters. But it's far from a truthful vision of who Batman is.
Oh, yeah.
And any objective observer of comic book adaptations would be able to understand that. But then you have these more straight adaptations of a single story like Watchmen, or like 300, or Sin City, I think, is probably even more
Sin City's a good one.
work-intensive than some of these other ones.
300.
Yeah, 300. I mean, 300 is pretty straight, but the
Minus
thing
a few things,
that separates Sin City is because it is a collection of separate stories that united into one film. At least, I mean, you can watch the separate stories on home media, but when you went to sit in the theater, it was an adaptation of several stories in the same world put into one, almost like its own cinematic universe in one collection, right?
And, but it also, they followed what's amazing about Sin City, in which I don't think we'll ever get a comic like this. I mean, never say never, right? But I think they followed the panels almost verbatim. The dialogue was verbatim. I mean, it was... And that's what, and Sin City is I think I had never seen the second one. I don't know. I heard it's bad. But the first one, to me,
it's okay.
It blew me away because I had read a few of the stories It didn't. Ironically, it didn't do a Dame to Kill For, which was my favorite until the second one, which I still haven't seen. That was my favorite Sin City story. But I read a few of the other ones, and I was like, oh yeah, okay. And it definitely followed them like to like the T and like dialogue, and it was crazy.
Well, visually too. I mean.
Right.
I think Robert Rodriguez used the comics as a storyboard.
Yeah, no, and
as did Zack Snyder on Watchmen.
Yeah,
and so that's what's really, those two films you could argue are probably the most straight best adaptations straight from the source material. Talking about the bigger superheroes like the Spider-Mans and things like that and the Batmans. What's interesting is you gotta think of it too. Like you brought up why did the studios go with Mary Jane instead of Gwen Stacy in the Raimi films? Well, I can tell you right now. I think think about at the time, because comic books weren't selling very well at that time. 2001, you had just started, or about 2001, you had, when they're working on this stuff, they're working on basically comics are just coming out of Marvel specifically coming out of bankruptcy. Yeah. And you have Joe Quesada trying his best to like save Marvel, and they're throwing their
shout out to Joey Q.
Yeah, it's throwing them, man. Wow. They're throwing their properties out to sell to save their own company. And you have Spider-Man. And think about this. They're working. I mean, Sony could have done whatever they want, but I'm sure Marvel's like, listen, you got to put Mary Jane in this because he at the time was married to Mary Jane. And they probably were like, you got to make it look like the comic book a little bit. Yeah, or whatever. Because they do eventually go there almost in episode 3. This is the third movie.
Spider-Man 3.
Right. But my point is this, though, like you had like probably a mandate instead of like, let's do Gwen Stacy, which probably would have made more sense at the very end because he would have killed her. Which
it's just weird that they throw her in.
Right.
One, but
that's what I'm saying is I think like they just weren't and they didn't know what to do. And I think Marvel was probably said, hey, you know what? Don't worry about adapting a specific story. Let's just promote this character in the comic books because we want to save our company. So here, shove Mary Jane in this thing.
Yeah, do you think Mary Jane is the moneymaker though? Like,
no. I don't think it's a moneymaker.
Spider-Man.
I think. No, I know, but you want to sell your product that's already out there, and what's out there is Spider-Man married to Mary Jane, so they're together. So she's the face with a maid. She's like the supporting character besides Aunt May.
Well, there may also have been at least a partial influence on not wanting to have the female protagonist or love interest in your first movie die right out of the gate.
Too. Yeah.
Because that's a really interesting aspect of the original Spider-Man movie's adaptation. The end of it is it's the same kind of sequence of events that led to Gwen Stacy's death.
Yeah.
And they decided to go in a different direction, first by having Mary Jane, but also by allowing him to actually save her.
And to be what's cool about bringing that whole thing up there, Chris, is the fact that again about adapting. So instead of doing a totally different, let's try to reinvent the wheel. They said let's have him let's imitate that Gwen Stacy thing, but it's maybe throw some people off. Like, are they going to kill Mary Jane? Like again, like I don't think we ever thought that, but again, they adapted a huge part of that Gwen Stacy story and put it in the Spider. I mean, it's basically almost that Jerry Conway who wrote that story, for Green Goblin. Mm-hmm. So they almost adapted that. They just took the beginning of Dan Lee Ditko, shoved it with that, and it's almost like pretty much the Green Goblin story.
That was one of those instances too where you had a filmmaker who was actually familiar with the source material in an overriding capacity. I mean, Sam Raimi is a fan primarily of 60s and 70s Spider-Man.
Right.
I mean, everyone has heard the story of how he had Spider-Man painted on his wall when he was a kid. But I mean, that's also one of the things that led Spider-Man 3 to mediocrity is because Avi Arad wanted to shoehorn Venom in there, and Sam Raimi
was
didn't
a
know
cooks in the
anything
kitchen
about
kind of
Venom.
deal.
Yeah.
Well, what's
he
funny?
had no passion for him.
Well, you know what's funny?
Reflected in the work.
I just started Spider-Man 3 with 4K today because Cloud made me jealous of having all the Spider-Man films and I didn't, so I had to go buy them immediately.
Watch the editor's cut. Watch the editor's cut.
I'm not watching the editor's cut, but anyway, so I'll just stop it.
Watch the editor's cut, bro.
Let me tell my story.
He'll watch the theatrical theatrical, then he'll eventually watch
eventually.
Yeah.
So it was funny because on the way over to buy the 4Ks, I'm talking to Clow. He's helping me like try to put on hold for me. It's ridiculous.
That's
Clow's-
amazing.
He's my homie.
I know a guy. He's gonna give you those movies.
Yeah, so
Those
anyway,
steel books. Oh,
but but like I was rewatching it today, and I forgot that Rami wrote the movie with his brother.
Yeah.
yeah.
Like I totally forgot about that. And I'm
Yeah.
like, and I thought about that. It's really interesting. So the guy who has success adapting these characters like Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus and things like that, they're going to have him adapt Venom. And he didn't write the other films before it, I'm pretty sure. So it was just a weird thing. Like, why'd they let Rami write this movie? That's kind of strange.
Well, I mean,
so.
if they had managed to keep it, like that movie could have lost Harry Osborn as the Goblin too.
Yeah.
Like if they just kept it at Sandman.
Yeah,
But-
that's what he was really interested in the most.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and that's
And
because
Vulture,
Sandman
yeah,
is a classic Spider-Man villain. You know, he's obviously not as popular as someone like Green Goblin or Doc Ock, but he's still from that era that Sam Raimi was informed by, and it's reflected
Gosh,
in the work.
Thomas Hayden
you know?
Church looked.
He looked great.
He did.
Marco.
He liked
great.
Clint Marco.
He was great.
Fantastic.
There's a great scene in the editor's cut that's
Well,
not in the theatrical.
So
I'm just
again,
saying.
let's go back to the adaptations for a second. Spider-Man 3 is a great example of this. Is that you look, there's nothing that they're adapting at all. Like they're just taking like little bits and pieces of from stories. But there's no single story. So then he had to wrap up the Hobgoblin. He tried to put in the Sandman.
You mean the new Goblin?
The new Goblin.
Yeah, whatever the heck you want to call it.
Why didn't
My
they
po-
call him the
Extreme
Hobgoblin?
Goblin.
Right, yeah, with a snowboard. But like the thing is, there wasn't any story, so he didn't have he didn't have the blueprint from the 60s and 70s comics to adapt from. He's just going by like, I'm just gonna throw all these things in, and it shows. I mean, I think it's not as bad as people like make it out to be. There's bad moments for sure.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that the reason why, and honestly, the reason why I think it fails to other people is because he's not going from the source material. He's trying to make it on his own because there's nothing for him to adapt at that point.
Well,
He's
but you
trying to
also
come up all by himself.
If you look at the adaptive philosophy, let's say for Venom specifically, Spider-Man 3, obviously it didn't come from a place of understanding or really an interest in serving a story. That was a studio mandated thing to try and make it popular. But then you look at like I actually just recently watched the multi-episode saga of the alien costume from the 90s animated series.
Great. That's a great adaptation.
Oh, man.
And
I just bought the first season of that animated series. I want to watch those.
It's great. I love that show, even though, I mean, it's kind of a glorified toy commercial, but you don't matter because the quality is actually pretty solid.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the alien costume set of episodes, it obviously couldn't, at least not by that point in the production cycle, actually adapt Secret Wars. So it decided to use another method to deliver the symbiote to Earth by invoking, John Jameson and the shuttle crash, and it actually introduced who was Rhino. It introduced Rhino in those episodes
And Shocker.
at the beginning, and Shocker, and but it got the spirit of when the suit actually does bond to Spider-Man in a far more correct fashion, and the origin of Venom was able to play out a little bit more naturally. And a story that's now like a perennial classic from that era of comics. It had a far better representation, and from what I understand, it was also adapted in a more efficient way in Spectacular Spider-Man, although I haven't seen those episodes.
I haven't either.
But I hear that that's probably like the second best animated Spider-Man, at least of the 90s, for people like us. But it also brings to mind, another story that's adapted constantly in other media because it was such a pop culture touchstone. It's a story that actually made the mainstream obsessed with comics for a little while, and that's the death of Superman. And the death of Superman, we just had an animated adaptation come out this year, but they took a first crack at it in 2007 in animation. There's a video game adaptation. There was also they tried to adapt at least a portion of it in a major live-action motion picture. And that's a story that just seems like it's fed into so many different things.
Like Doomsday, it won't die.
Kind of, yeah. But I mean, it's like there are so many different ways to to examine that original story and how it's bled into other adaptations. I mean, really, honestly, the best adaptation is probably the novelization. If you're talking about something besides the comics, but
prose and comic books don't mix.
Oh, they do too.
They don't.
Man.
They don't exist.
Says the guy who refuses to read Rucka's novelization of No Man's Land.
That
which is one
was
of the
great.
Best versions of any Batman story.
I like the Nightfall novel too.
There you go. Yeah,
I'm a superhero purist. Comic books or bust or films
okay.
I was about to say, what about movies
or TV
or games? Anything but books.
But I mean, I think that the death of Superman is a really interesting example to draw from, because every adaptation that I had seen before this year failed kind of miserably, at least in some respect.
Yes.
The animated movie that came out this year was brilliant.
Yes, it
and
was.
It adapted everything that it needed to, because it did something that you would think would be kind of fundamental and simple, by relying on the emotion and the characters as opposed to just the fight.
But Chris, can I ask you a question? And I'm not sure. And it obviously this applies to all you guys because I have not seen this yet. But does the death of Superman, does it take from the comic books? Like, do we see like straight, like does it have like the panel where they hate each other at the same time? And before you guys go on,
there.
Well, the reason why I say that is because I think where I'm getting at is one reason why they want to do these adaptations is because it is so, like, the comic did such a great job, even though it was a gimmick, it did a great job of illustrating someone that can match up against Superman and they can go toe to toe and just go all out. And I think that that's one of the appeals to me of Superman and the death of Superman.
So here's the thing. The adaptive philosophy for the Death of Superman animated movie, it tweaks some things. Like, the Justice League does appear, but it's like the actual A-list Justice League as opposed to C-list
it's not
Justice
Guy
League
Gardner
that appeared in the original comic.
Who's the guy with like the red white like costume?
That was Bloodwind, but that was actually Martian.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Is that Bloodwind with like a Y? We have, and he's got the pouches and stuff, right?
But that was actually Martian Manhunter. That's the thing. Like,
yeah, Bloodwind didn't have any pouches. I remember like when I first read that comic book, I'm like, who is this guy? Like,
you found out later that he was the Martian Manhunter posing as someone
Bloodwind
else.
was the character find of 1992.
Yeah, totally. And the Guardian.
Know.
Who can forget the Guardian?
Oh, that's right, the Guardian, the yellow blue guy.
No, the Guardian's old school Kirby though.
Yeah. But the Guardian was.
I like Guardian.
Was a very big presence in the original story.
Oh, okay.
The death of Superman.
Yeah, with the Newsboy Legion and stuff.
Well, see, here's the thing is too is like so the animated version that just came out it's an adaptation of the comic book, but it's also has these extra parameters of putting this version of the story inside of an existing animated shared universe, right? Exactly. So it's kind of a good. It's one of the bigger examples of a DC thing trying to do this. Marvel does it all the time with their with the MCU, but seeing it happen like this in the animated universe was interesting.
But that's the thing, right? Because it takes some very different specific approaches. So, Paul, like the instance you're talking about of the pivotal moment where they hit each other, it plays out a little differently in the movie. But the emotion of those moments is far more truthful than any other adaptation, including Dawn of Justice.
Yeah,
because Dawn of Justice, I mean, it was basically just, it didn't adapt any specific elements. It was just the fight, and it added Batman and Wonder Woman into the mix to give people a Trinity moment, right, for the first time on film.
Because the death of Superman in Dawn of Justice was kind of it was coming out of a surprise. I mean, they kind of ruined it with having Doomsday. As soon as you show Doomsday, you're like, oh, dang, are they trying to put Death of Superman in here too?
Right,
I don't think the payoff was as great as it should have been or could have been. So I really feel like we were super robbed of a really cool Death of Superman film adaptation because unless they completely
and it wasn't about that. It was about leading into Justice League,
and that's what I'm talking about. Like that could have been a really interesting film. We didn't fall in love with Superman yet, and so we're already going to kill him in his second appearance. And
like Chris was saying, like part of what makes the Death of Superman work. The story is not the fight. It's your emotional investment in Superman himself.
Well,
I would say the same thing about The Dark Knight Returns. That story, both of those stories, Dark Knight Returns and Death of Superman, those are predicated on you giving a crap about the 70 years of history that's built up with those comic book characters, and then seeing something very different happen to
the
them.
original creative teams on the Superman books at the time will even tell you, because there's a really great documentary on the Superman Doomsday DVD and Blu-ray about that instance in the comics, and it talked to Roger Stern, it talked to Louise Simonson, it talked to Dan Jurgens, and
Stern
they all
was on
say,
it?
yeah,
He wrote. He was part of that team.
Yeah, he was on the Superman books.
That's
at the time.
That's right. He was on Adventures of, right?
And he did the novelization.
but
I've got an extra copy of that, Paul. I can send it to you.
There you go. But
I
two
do
copies.
I do need kindling. So
oh
go
dear
ahead, bring it
God. Anyway, all those comic book creators even said it was never about the fight. It's about what follows the fight. Because the fight is just a means to tell the story of what it's like when you rip the Band-Aid off of a gaping wound. And that Band-Aid was Superman, right? And the emotional aspects of the original stories, the animated movie that just came out, it didn't dive too deeply into it, but it did the legwork leading up to the pivotal moment of the death of Superman, the titular moment. I mean, it punched me in the stomach when he saves this kid from being crushed on a bridge. And he's beaten and bloodied, and he just looks at him and hands him his little toy that he lost and says, "Don't worry, everything's gonna be all right." Yeah. And in the moment,
and then the moment where they flip the "Who's Got Me."
Yeah, that's funny, and that's Peter Tomasi, right? Because you actually had someone experienced with telling Superman stories in comics to create this adaptation, and that's one of the reasons the screenplay works. But it also leans on the emotion when Lois is holding him in those last moments. Yeah. And he's not like scared because he's Superman. He's not scared of death, but you could tell that he's sad that his time is up. Yeah. And these gentle tears drip down his face as he looks to Lois, and he just dies. And it's just like, holy crap. You actually leaned on something that was significant in the intent of the original story. Mm-hmm. I mean, it got more specifics right in that animated movie than any other adaptation of the death of Superman, but it's the emotional truthfulness that almost outweighs the importance of staying true to specific visual cues or moments as they originally happened. Because if it gets you to the same emotional place at the end of the road, then that still constitutes a good adaptation.
Well, and for me, it's interesting because you have Doomsday, the whole Doomsday thing, and I feel like, Chris Terrio and maybe the executives behind, and again, I want to be very clear. I know there's a lot of people who love BVS and think it's a masterpiece, and I like it. I don't think it's a masterpiece, but I do like it. I think
me too. I like it.
But I have to say, for me, the death of Superman wasn't earned because he's not in the movie as much. And in his own sequel, or a sequel that he's in with this movie, and his death, it's basically just a way for Superman to kind of fight something that's as powerful as he is, and to kill him.
Yeah, it's a way to get him out of the picture.
Right, exactly. And the thing,
which you don't need to start the Justice League.
Right, yeah, exactly. but the thing is, what stinks is that I think that most people would agree that, like, even if you thought the movie was a masterpiece, I think most people would agree, yeah, it would have been nice to have Doomsday had at least been saved, or maybe they could have more of an emphasis on them together. They had that emotional buildup like Chris was talking about, because that's what makes the story good. And again, maybe Chris Terrio and the other people thought, we got to put Doomsday in it because it's Doomsday. Everyone likes Doomsday. And again, you're not
that Doomsday. That was Doo-Doo Day.
Well, right. But my point is this, though, that they didn't really adapt anything. They just said, we should kill him off for this because he was killed off by Doomsday, so we'll throw this in there. It's like there wasn't anything. They didn't look at the heart of the adaptation, like what exactly was successful about the story.
Right. Well, that's like what I was saying earlier. Is like pulling bits and pieces of stories and things, and the intent behind why you're pulling it, I think, is very important. Yeah.
You know what's a good adaptation from on paper, but it's not executed the best, even though I like it. I would say the first Daredevil movie. Like, you look at it.
That's a great example. Yeah, that's a great example.
Is Jennifer Garner a great Elektra? No, she's terrible. Yeah. But and is the music terrible in it? Yes. New metal is awful. I'm sorry, but can't wake up. No, not only that. Like there's a montage sequence where like Ben
I like the score.
The score's fine, but the music they used was dated the day they put it in the movie.
Yeah,
like I remember cringing, being like, "Oh, this is bad." Like this the part where he's
See
like,
the director's cut?
"Oh, I love director's cut." Don't
Hold on. Director's cut.
So you should watch director's cut.
Wait, the director's cut does not make the movie better.
I think it does.
It just adds more Coolio. That's it.
No,
it's like
no.
20% more Coolio.
No, there's more fighting, and there's more. Actually, there's a big part
like
is
it
actually the scene where Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner in the theatrical cut, he hears someone. They're in the rain,
Yeah,
and they hear the guy screaming. Then he's like, "I'm gonna go with her instead of helping the guy," and they go have sex or whatever. And it's like they have like little ridiculous scenes.
Yeah, they take that out of the
the director's cut. He actually he
goes to help the
bails.
guy.
Yeah, which that's I'm like that is so. You look at that movie. That the director's cut is actually, even though I don't love some of the decisions of acting. And
why do you hate Evanescence?
Anyway, I remember I wanted to make out with a girlfriend of mine back in the day to Evanescence just to say I did it. We made out to Evanescence once, and it was ridiculous. But anyway, I was a weird kid. Okay, so
It's almost like you couldn't wake up.
Oh God. But anyway, yeah, that's a great example. I think of
That's a good example, actually,
because it's not.
Yeah.
It takes everything. The Kingpin, Bullseye. It's really faithful to everything. It's just not executed the best overall. But I still love it.
I mean, it even pulled the Crow in there with the Flamin' D's.
Oh.
They were just adapting everything.
But again, it wasn't like. And I remember people arguing with me that it wasn't. These diehard DD people were not
Happy
into
Hogan and Kevin Smith is in it too.
Yeah, I felt like they got everything down pretty down,
Favreau as Foggy was fantastic.
He was great.
He's good.
Great, Foggy. So I guess think about this too. All right, Dark Phoenix.
I was about to bring that up. I was going to ask for help on this one because when we were talking about Spider-Man 3 and Venom, I was like that immediately made me think of another example of a third movie in a franchise pulling from.
Quickly before we jump to the next one, I just want to say about Daredevil and Mark Steven Johnson that the problem with Mark Steven Johnson is that he adapts specific moments because he wants to see specific images of stories that resonated with him. But when you put them together, they didn't make a whole lot of sense.
I disagree.
See, because those movies... I mean, I watched the Daredevil director's cut relatively recently, and I watched Ghost Rider. I don't know why.
Ghost Rider was rough. Ghost Rider is
He's all, hey,
rough.
you loved my Daredevil? Get ready for Ghost Rider.
Okay.
Nick Cage, do you like jelly beans? Yeah. I'm going to put jelly beans in this.
Oh, good God. But anyway, I mean...
Sorry.
That's the thing, right? Because you see very recognizable images of Frank Miller's Daredevil run in the original movie, and it just, it doesn't combine into anything that's really emotionally appealing if you know Daredevil as one of your favorite heroes. That's the thing. He wants to adapt the imagery. In some cases, he was really good at his casting. I actually adore Michael Clark Duncan as the Kingpin.
Yeah.
And like you guys said, Foggy Nelson, perfectly cast, and Jon Favreau. But the reason that movie falls by the wayside, even though it has some of those identifiable images, like Elektra with a sigh poking through the back of her costume, that's one of the big images of Frank Miller's run, and him on
and they
the
pause
cross.
on it.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the thing. They call more attention
it's
to
like,
it.
I remember these guys.
I mean, there are worse comic book movies than Daredevil, but the problem for me is that they didn't actually give attention to the story and a lot of the things that actually make Matt Murdock one of Marvel's coolest characters.
See, we could debate that all day. I really could. But I think if you look at just strictly stories, from the characterizations of the characters.
But hold on, because the theme of this is adaptation. Would you say that Daredevil is a good movie via its adaptation of the source material?
I would say yes, because it takes all the elements.
You're insane.
No way, man. Hold on. I have read a lot of Daredevil comics, and I will say, he's one of my favorite characters, and I love the TV. The Netflix series is obviously eons above the movie.
Yeah.
But the movie, if you look at it if you take the comic book, the imagery, he definitely borrowed from different parts of the Kevin Smith. He borrows from Kevin Smith right out the gate, right? So, but at the same time, he meets Elektra. Like, you know, the only thing I'll say this, the only thing they
Smells
didn't
like
do
rose
is,
oil.
oh Lord, the one thing I will say they didn't adapt was the fact that he didn't know her from before. But if you look at like all these other moments that make Daredevil work,
But that's
like,
more of an incidental thing. There's not a lot of substance. It's the same thing that bedazzled Tim Story's Fantastic Four movies.
Oh,
You know,
okay,
I mean,
you know
it's
what? That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
There's
That's a good
recognizable
point. I concede.
aspects, but it doesn't combine
Yeah,
into something that's compelling.
The Daredevil movie is like a bunch of your favorite covers of the Daredevil comic mixed into a movie. It's not like it's some of it just doesn't fit. It's like, here's a whole bunch of great, you know, Daredevil comic books. You should read these.
All the
but not as one thing.
Yeah, but it's weird because again, we talk about adapting. The characterizations for everyone worked. Did it work as a flow of a movie? That's why I said it wasn't necessarily the best executed, but all the characters felt right to me for the most part. Like I thought everyone like nailed it. Even Ben Urich I thought was perfect.
I like
and stuff.
Joy Pants.
So. Yeah, I feel like besides like, you know, Garner's acting, and I felt like they got the characters right. Just I have to probably best what I'm trying to say, Chris, is like what you're saying is right too, because the flow wasn't a great flow of the movie, and I would agree to that.
They botched the origin big time. Like one of the if you're adapting Daredevil, one of the key parts of him getting his powers and becoming, you know, Daredevil is him being brave, and instead, you had him reacting to a situation
really good point,
and running, you know, out of fear, and his accident is based on a fear, because not doing anything heroic. You know, it was weird because they had an homage to him saving, you know, Stan Lee getting hit, but I was like, why didn't they just make that the scene? Yeah. Why did it have to be him, you know, running from his dad? And that's the biggest part of that movie that bugged me, because that's the heart of Daredevil right there.
That's a good point. Yeah, but because you're right, because they called him Daredevil, you know, because he was so, you know, daring as a kid and did all these crazy stunts. So, and that actually does make more sense in that. But they wanted to obviously tie it to more emotional, and that was fine for me. Again, that adapting that, like using that to like have a more moral center, to have more gravity when his dad does die, I could buy into that, because you talk about the normies, the general audience that you love to hear about so much, that you want to have them invested. So adapting that part of it worked for me. I guess I want to make sure the Batman diehards aren't going to get left out here. I want to make sure we talk about some Batman stuff really fast. So I'll bring
we did, but we'll bring it back.
Yeah, I'll bring it back a little bit. We have plenty of time left, but I wanted to talk about Batman for a second. That, you know, one of the things I really appreciated about Batman Begins, and Chris kind of talked about it, is that, you know, again, you were taking these different elements of things, but like of whatever. But I really felt like when I left Batman Begins, I went immediately and bought Year One like the next day, because I knew that was it was heavily, you know, influenced by that. Yeah. And I really felt like that's what it was emulating. Like it wasn't a straight adaptation, but like that inspiration for it almost feels like an adaptation. It's almost like he took like the idea of what they did and filled in the gaps. And I don't.
Well, it wasn't just filling gaps. It was taking the parts that made sense in terms of the origin, but they made their own thing out of it too. They made their own through line. They took a lot of the rougher parts, or the parts that didn't make sense for their story, out of it. Yeah, they changed Gordon's character completely. They took Selina out. Well, you know, Flash.
Yeah. But the thing that was adapted closely is the relationship between Bruce and Gordon, and how that's cultivated, and how it becomes,
and Batman himself, and why he's there, and like
I did really want the scene where all the, you know, the high class uppity ups are having dinner and Batman shows up. I really wanted that scene.
That would have been cool,
but it's fine.
But that's
there's there's some things that are ripped from it, like the bat shoe and the bats through the windows. Yeah.
But that's the thing. There's an animated adaptation for that too that tries to be a specific.
I didn't like it. I turned it off.
Exactly, but
that's not as good. Yeah,
that's the thing. That's exactly the point. Is that a straight adaptation of that story does not work as well as a spiritual adaptation.
Right?
Does.
Because and that's a great point too. Because Alan Moore always said The Watchmen was unfilmable. And I think to an extent, like if you were to do it panel for panel, it's impossible because it really takes advantage of the 9-panel structure that Dave Gibbons and him like wanted to make sure that it was a true comic book. And when I look at year one, that's the same thing. Like I almost feel like it's not unfilmable, but to a point where it works the best as a comic because you're so, I remember like the TV stuff like really worked. I mean, you can't really do that necessarily in a movie, like where they have like, they talk about, Bruce Wayne returns from his long absence, blah, blah, blah. And different things like that, like going back to Selena Kyle randomly for like a couple panels, and all the Batman fans know that. Like to me, it's a perfect, like, it really is. I think that year one is one of the most perfect comic books out there. I think it's a beautiful piece of work.
Yeah,
my favorite.
But yeah,
but that's the thing is when you take that though, that's the thing is like they adapted it a lot more, 1-to-1 when they did the animated version, and that's when you can get in trouble because when you don't use the advantage of the medium that you're in, it can leave holes of like, well, this doesn't make as much sense, or this worked well in the comics, but maybe not, as a literal thing on film, because now, it moves, it's got sound, it's got, this is a whole different thing, and there are things that you can do to your advantage. Like for example, the successful version of that is the Dark Knight Returns adaptation, and I think
that's really good.
That one did everything right. It took the best parts of the comic, it streamlined it. It's 2 parts. It's 2 parts.
It's long.
Well, you can get a single version now too. They have a single version.
Yeah,
well, I have it. I have the single version, and what's funny? Me and Andy DiGenova still joke about this. A while ago, is that I always tell him I've never finished it. I've always started, and I love the Dark Knight Returns. Like it is, like Dark Knight Returns is what I swear on my life that the Dark Knight Returns is one of the first things I remember about Batman as a kid, because my brother bought the graphic novel in 88 or 89 right before the movie came out. And I remember looking at that comic and loving the big, like, it's a splash page where it's just the whole page is filled.
Yeah.
I always figured
I know what you're talking about.
Splash page, but like of Carrie and Batman like flying together, or jumping off somewhere together.
Yeah.
And those
Paul, Batman doesn't fly, man. Come on.
Shut up. Anyway, but it's funny because I love that series. But anyway, it's just funny because when I sit down and watch it, it's so long, because it is like you said, it's almost a literal translation. It even fills in some gaps too, because I remember I was complaining to Chris. I'm like, why is Bruce driving at the very beginning of this stupid movie? And he was like, it's in the book. I'm like, no, it's not. And I read it. I'm like, oh, it is. I forgot. So, but no, like it really does an amazing job. But it's literally so long that I'd rather just read the comic. It's not bad.
Longer than like Batman Begins or whatever. It's like 2.5 hours or something. When
it's still long. That's a long time. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But I guess for me,
it's a dense
know what?
book.
Next time you're cleaning up the office, the studio, put it on the
okay.
background.
It's a smart move. I should have thought. I should put that in.
I think, and that's the thing, I think it works better as 2 separate films, personally. Like
Really?
I
the
think
way
you're right.
that
Yeah,
I do. Mm-hmm. Because whenever I watch it, because it almost does it as a service to watch it straight through, because with the way they adapted it, it released in 2 separate chunks, and they did their best to make a narrative through line for each film. Mm-hmm. So you can watch part 1 without really watching part 2, and it still makes sense. It still holds up. There's a beginning, middle, and end. There's an arc that completes in that first movie, and they just pick it up in the next one. But all the things they did, where they like took the story, the heart of the story, they took out the internal monologue, because that's again something that looks great on a comic book page. You can internalize it, but watching it might not work as great. And a lot of the choices they made, I thought, worked really well.
The thought balloons, or caption balloons, as like I've been reading old Spider-Man comics, and obviously like they had thought balloons for everything, and that died out over the years. I still like them, but they've turned into caption boxes. Like that's what they do in the Dark Knight Returns, and that is one thing that I think it's really hard to convey on the screen when you want to have someone, when they're thinking, and there's so much like weight that these heroes are going through. And I think Bruce, that's a great example for Bruce in Dark Knight Returns, is that there's he's thinking so much or any character in comic books, and I think it's hard to convey that, and because then you have to, instead of, you have to show the audience rather than like read it, right, or whatever. So you have to like put them in a situation that emulates what the captions are trying to give out, because those captions are paid off later on in the story. Yeah. So it's again, you said it best, Ryan. Like, it's really hard to convey that to to a straight adaptation. So. And with Batman, there's a lot of like, eternal like thinking, or the writer. I mean, I just read Under the Red Hood, or Under the Hood, as I have it as, and Batman's like, there's Penny, Pennyworth. Alfred is like literally talking in himself and captioning throughout the whole story. And if you can't adapt that. You have to he has to talk to and interact with Batman. And to be honest, I love the way the comics have it set up, because you can have this emotional this emotional tenseness that's going on throughout the story. Yeah. And you have Alfred just trying to figure out how he's going to do this, while he knows Bruce is struggling over something that he knows is coming, or that is happening. You can't really do that. You have to have them interact, and that kind of makes the tension looser. So I love the emotional buildup that comics can do with that's missing in film. Film can do action, and film can do, I think, moments, like really dramatic moments, better than comics can. But I think the buildup and all of that emotional buildup is so much better in comic books. I mean, obviously you have more time, because you have you have an infinite amount of panels to use, essentially, whereas you only have, again, probably 3 minutes, 4 minutes tops to convey what you want.
Well, but that's the thing too, right? Is that you hit the nail on the head. The key pivotal aspect is time. Time enough to build the characters, time enough to establish the stakes. And I think a perfect example of probably a middle of the road adaptive philosophy, but also having enough time to convey the emotional weight, is Infinity War. Because Infinity War is the 10-year culmination of an untold number of movies, and they actually did have the time to funnel all of the stuff that we had seen before from a bunch of what we thought were disparate worlds into this one event, to actually convey the proper sort of send-off that follows the build-up that we've been observing now for a decade. And I think that's the one example that flies in the face of what you just said. Only because it's a grand experiment that actually did put in the time to have those kinds of emotional payoffs, while also being at least a partial adaptation of a story that we've seen in the comics before. And it's a very interesting time to be a comic book fan because of that.
Yeah, that's a great example too. Just thinking about how do you translate certain through lines of stories, like Paul was saying. You can do things through things like caption boxes all throughout an issue, and then you can have it pay off. But I was just thinking, in a way, you can do that in film, but you have to be a little bit more clever about it if you're trying to make people connect dots. Like, for example, in The Dark Knight, like that's one of the best examples ever. Like, at the ending, the whole ending of The Dark Knight, by the time you get to Gordon's speech at the end, Silent Guardian, Watchful Protector, Dark Knight. He's saying all those things over top of a montage of other things happening, and by the time that happens, it's like you filling in the caption boxes yourself. You're putting all the threads together yourself, and you're realizing all the story threads, everything's coming together, and then that's happening in your head while you're listening to Gordon talk, and that all kind of works together. And I think that is something that film can do very well, but it's a rare thing to make it have that kind of impact. But that's why The Dark Knight's so good.
And going back to Infinity War, because when you actually look at the way that movie is structured, it's extremely simplistic from a plot perspective. But it makes up for it by having such strong character work that descends from all of these movies that we've seen before. So you get away with having something that's relatively simplistic when it comes to its plot. But because it's the first thing that actually pays off the legwork that a lot of other filmmakers put into these other characters, the character work between the new interactions and everything else was so strong that it absolutely makes up for a relatively by the numbers kind of A to B story. So,
but I think, and again, we're going back to the idea of what they're doing. Like they had a blueprint. That's the beauty of these adapting. And Kevin Feige, and again, I know we're on Batman on Film, and I want to be very careful. There's a lot of people. I don't want people to get mad that we're talking about Marvel. And, but
It's all right.
I know. But Kevin Feige, I think the most genius aspect. I've been saying this on the Marvel newscast a ton for a while now, for years it seems like, that the reason why Kevin Feige is so good is that he knows the source material.
Yeah.
And not only does he know the source material, he knows what works in the source material. So
and he has the power to actually to say
That's
what
a
to
big
adapt
part of it.
properly.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that's the thing too, right? I mean, look at where you were emotionally, all of you guys. Examine your emotional states at the end of Infinity War compared with your emotional states at the end of Dawn of Justice. Do they compare?
No,
not at all.
But
not
they're
in
hard
the
to
least.
compare though too, because they're not. Again, Kevin Feige.
Well,
had
they're trying.
success.
That's they wanted each place
wanted
wanted
that
you to
payoff,
be.
yeah.
They wanted you to have
Right.
that payoff. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is this: is that and again, I think what Kevin Feige does is, like, people say he's a genius, and he is, but I don't know if he's a creative genius in a sense to where he's plucking these stories out of thin air. Like, I have this idea, or bam. No, he's a genius in a sense that he has a source. He has a source material, and he's looking and he says, okay, this, like, Winter Soldier is a great example.
Yep.
I loved Winter Soldier, both
Yep.
the comic version and the movie version, because the comic version literally is a masterpiece in bringing someone back that was almost considered impossible / like the most dead character besides Uncle Ben in the comic books. Whereas
Jason Todd even.
Foreshadowing, huh? But in the film, he takes that and goes, okay, how do I push this story, adapt and take all these parts from Winter Soldier that make it awesome again, which is the payoff of Cap's relationship with Bucky in the first film, and say, okay, I have that to play with, and how do I push my narrative forward with all these other films? I gotta get rid of S.H.I.E.L.D., so here you go, bam. So he takes the idea of Winter Soldier and he surrounds it with a different story, but it's all about the Winter Soldier itself and Hydra and stuff. And again, and even Hydra, the whole Hydra thing was from Jonathan Hickman, right, Chris? So, like, he took elements of that and put it into Winter Soldier. So he's literally and again, look at Thor Ragnarok. Is Planet Hulk and Walt Simonson put together. And so instead of, like, I have to do a straight adaptation, he's like, I'm literally taking a pretty truthful, like almost super truthful element from Ragnarok, from the Walter Simonson run, and a huge chunk of a true adaptation from Planet Hulk, putting them together and making a giant box office smash.
Well, but beyond that too, I mean, you hit on what actually makes comic book adaptations work, in the sense that you adapt things from a bunch of different sources, and even if those specific events may have happened in the source material before, all of those things combine into something new.
Yep.
Regardless of what people may say, like, well, I've seen that before. Yeah, you've seen it before, but you haven't seen it this way before.
Yeah.
And it's giving specific context to a new work that might feature those characters, but it's still descended from something that is not exactly the way that you've seen it before.
Yeah.
And that's why Nolan's movies work so well. As we've talked about, it's a hodgepodge. He's throwing all these things into the blender, and it combines into a flavor that's familiar, but it's still different. It's something that you haven't quite tasted before, even if it has a tinge of familiarity to it. And that's one of the things that makes the Dark Knight trilogy 3 elements of adaptation that endure, because it's truthful to the characters and the spirit of the source material, even if it's not true to either events or aesthetics, as that whole perma-white debate exploded 10 years ago.
Oh, man.
But no one disputes now that version of the Joker is the most truthful when it comes to conveying the same kind of emotional dread that you get from the Joker when you read comics.
Yeah. More of what that character is, yeah.
Can I throw something crazy out to you guys? I want you guys all to answer this, and maybe I'm being crazy.
Yeah.
And I know I don't want.
Yeah, you're crazy. You can answer.
Okay. I know I'm crazy. I'm crazy. So, well, I would argue that
I'm not.
Well,
I'm not.
oh wow! I think that if you look at, let's say, Iron Man's a great example, and this is, and again, they're adapting like pretty basic like basic things from the Iron Man films.
Yeah.
But that's, to me, that's not the genius of the Iron Man films. The Iron Man films aren't even adapting. They never even adapted the most famous Iron Man story before that, which was Demon in the Bottle, and then you go Armor Wars. Yeah, they barely even touched on that. Yeah. What's interesting about the Iron Man films, and then Kevin Feige, really, I think he kind of hit gold with this, was with Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah,
because he did. And let's be real, I've read a decent amount of Iron Man. That's not Iron Man's characterization.
Nope.
That is literally a different interpretation of Tony Stark that worked. That
they're putting into comics now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
well, that's like a whole different thing. It's almost like when a comic book relaunches itself and changes the character within the comics itself. It's like they did that, but in the movies,
the elements,
and they used that as a springboard for this larger MCU.
So, and then granted, like there wasn't, and I will give Feige some credit that he didn't like he was using Iron Man because he knew he could cast someone who you could portray the character. And I'm not sure. And I know obviously Robert Downey is a big reason, or is the reason why Iron Man was successful. I think the movie was, if you would have put someone else in the suit, I think it would have been okay. It would have been fine. It would have been a fun movie, but it wouldn't have been as successful. It was Robert who made it, so it wasn't a straight adaptation. There was elements from different stories.
That movie was all about Terrence Howard. What are you talking about?
Yeah, right. So, but again, what's interesting, I was just saying Feige, all he does is take all these from. He has the source material, and he does. He had the villains. He's adding things in, but he really, I would give all the credit to Robert Downey because the Iron Man films don't really adapt anything. And look at Iron Man 3. They got a lot of backlash from adapting Extremis and then in all that stuff, but it wasn't even like that was a very loose adaptation. Even though it made a lot of money, it's not regarded as always. It's a very split down the middle film.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like the Mandarin twist.
Yeah, the Mandarin stuff and like the Extremis stuff.
I like it.
It was fine, but like again, he took elements of that and then put it into Iron Man 3 or said, hey, let's use this idea, but like that's funny because there's not a lot of Iron Man stuff to adapt. Armor Wars is probably the one I'm surprised they didn't go with, which they kind of they didn't even do that in the third one because this is armors are
Demon
all by itself
in a bottle.
Well, that's what we're saying. They touched upon it.
They touched upon it.
But here's the thing: like Iron Man 2, when that movie was going into production, I think it was even Jon Favreau who hinted at the idea that not only would Demon in a Bottle be a primary inspiration for Iron Man 2, but that he would see himself like Robert Oppenheimer, the creator of the nuclear bomb, as like the destroyer of worlds, taking on the emotional weight of creating a weapon that was extremely destructive, even if he was able to accomplish something good with it. None of that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that was. He also said that after. I think that was pretty soon after the Iron Man 1 was a huge success.
It was. Yes.
So I think, and there's elements.
And then they were
there.
like, "Oh, now we got to make it a cinematic universe." And they probably changed a lot of that stuff. Right.
Well, I think what happened was Robert Downey Jr. was so lovable that they weren't planning on that. They were like, they weren't planning on the fact that this guy was like so funny and he ad-libbed so much and they put that so much in the film. They're like, holy crap! Like,
to me, that's an aspect that could have made Iron Man 2 like a Dark Knight level kind of adaptation if they actually went inward to explore that character stuff.
It didn't also that was affected by the writer's strike too, wasn't it?
I'm sure it was.
Well, plus you had that's the thing. You also had Incredible Hulk that came out at the same time as Iron Man 2, and you had those were like two different tones.
Iron Man and Hulk came out like a couple months after Iron Man.
After Iron Man, right? And then Iron Man was the one that people liked, and so they were like, "Oh, well." And Hulk was a little bit darker, right? So maybe they kind of
a little bit
more towards.
That's a really good example of adaptation too, though, because the Incredible Hulk, it took from some elements of recognizable comic book continuity, but it also folded in aspects of a previous adaptation in the TV show. The whole on the run aspect, and that stuff appeared in the comics too, but it was a driving force of the TV show.
I would argue that the TV, it's basically a high budget version of a TV show with a monster, the Abomination in it, because there's not and again, like some of the best Hulk comics, they're never going to do because they don't have the rights to do their solo film.
But that's the thing too, right? Because, and I'm sure that you guys would agree agree with this just as much as anybody, that it's almost like, you know, what we talked about with the death of Superman, how they finally got it right by realizing that the fight was just a fight. Mm-hmm. And the thing that makes the Hulk so continuously fascinating is not the giant green behemoth, but what the guy does when he's normal and he's got his thoughts to himself. Yeah. And he has to reconcile what he's done sometimes, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's something that, I mean, as much as I love seeing the Hulk show up in an Avengers movie, I miss that more intimate character story of Bruce Banner. That we got hints of in The Incredible Hulk, and we kind of got hints of in the 2003 movie, but we
don't talk about adaptations. What was Ang Lee? He's like, here's some comic books. What are those? I don't want those. I want to
he had comic book panels like in the shot transitions.
Yeah, at some point there were too many. There was too many.
Peter David made the Hulk dogs. I mean, he took that from the comics.
No, this is literally what Ang Lee. Yeah, Ang Lee was like, do I have to actually read these comics to do the movie? Then Marvel's like, please just read them and get some inspiration. Then he like closed his eyes, probably like shoved the first like 30 issues off the stack, opened up the first page or the first comic book and went, "Oh, Hulk dogs, it's genius.
And
I'm good."
And that's the example of a filmmaker who thinks they can do it better than the source.
Exactly.
And you have to have someone who has respect. Now, I mean, Ang Lee is a wonderful filmmaker. He's a wonderful auteur, a modern auteur. Yeah. But if you think that you can do it better, you're already starting off on the wrong foot.
There you go.
Well, and wouldn't you say
I like Sam Elliott, though. He was great.
Oh, sure.
He was a great Thunderbolt Ross. Yeah, he was a great Thunderbolt Ross. Let's look at Justice League for a second. I'm going to bring it back to DC because I want to say now. Hold on. There wasn't Steppenwolf. Was there ever like a JL comic book series like that you could go to and say, man, this is a great like seeing the heroes take on this villain. There's some great imagery here. Was there anything like that for Steppenwolf that people could go to?
No.
Oh, for Steppenwolf? No.
Yeah. No. Steppenwolf has this was the biggest spotlight on Steppenwolf in the history of comics.
That has ever or will ever happen.
Yeah.
Like, now, granted,
it's mind-boggling, dude.
So here's my thing. What sucks about that is like again, I think I like Justice League for the record. I thought Steppenwolf was fine, but I think But what I think what happened was there's more gravitas you could have gone to.
Yes, that's the problem. That's the biggest problem with Justice League.
Obviously, Darkseid, you could have done Darkseid, but again, you want to build up to that.
You could have done anybody but Steppenwolf. When they announced Steppenwolf's the lead villain of Justice League, you're like, wait, the world's greatest superhero team, like the Big Seven, the guys that are on your underwear right now. They're gonna go up against
Steppenwolf.
Wait, Darkseid's uncle? Wait, what?
Well, and
I get the I get the reason that like
it would have made sense with the original story that we're going with. Okay, I can see it setting something up, but it was like Steppenwolf, like not Brainiac.
I bet that Darkseid would have showed up in the original conception of that movie.
That's part of it. Yeah, like I get the idea. I get the idea that it's that movie's more about the team than the villain. But here's, and I agree with Chris. I think they were just down to the wire, and they had to make a movie, unfortunately, they had to go with Steppenwolf.
But here's the interesting thing.
I would have rather than fought the band Steppenwolf.
I feel like I'm the one guy who's associated with BOF who will actually actively champion Justice League unironically. Because here's the thing with Justice League. All right, it was obviously a difficult situation. They had to put a movie out. They were up against the clock. They had this hodgepodge of footage that they had to put together into something that was possibly kind of coherent.
Yeah.
But the best strides that Justice League made, and I said this as much on the BOF review show like 25 episodes ago, or however long ago it was.
Episode 100, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
They made significant strides. Regardless of what anybody says, they made significant character strides in actually writing the ship. Because it was the same thing in comics with the New 52 that fashioned out of Rebirth. There was an aspect of the characters, of these really iconic DC characters, that had become unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And to me, the key example of that is Superman. Mm-hmm. So even though Justice League's plot is a mess by any conceivable metric, and any objective observer would tell you as much, the philosophy in adapting the characters is far more correct than I would argue the previous DCEU movies were. Yeah. And it got the characters to an end point that any filmmaker can come along and pick up and run with.
Yes,
and
I agree with that.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and do you think that part of the problem was not doing like a Kevin Feige thing and taking elements? Because, I love Man of Steel, but, do you think that maybe incorporating different elements of those stories and trying to see as the root of the basis of the comics?
But it goes
Man of
back
Steel has plenty of reference.
Oh, yeah, Birthright's in there.
But,
Birthright,
Man of Steel is actually far closer to me as far, like... When it first came out, I really loved that movie. But as time has gone on, the luster to me has worn off kind of significantly. And I actually look at it as a little bit closer to like the philosophy that Mark Steven Johnson had on Daredevil. It was a bunch of moments that were recognizable to me that probably did have more emotional significance. Like the Jonathan Kent, Young Clark stuff was really well done.
Yeah.
Snyder has always cast his movies very well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But...
yeah.
I mean, that's the whole thing, is that the movie gives a lot of lip service to the word hope, but it doesn't give a lot of service to the emotion of hope. You don't actually really feel it very much by the time that the credits roll when you really should. And Snyder's philosophy, no one can dispute that guy is a beautifully visual artist. You know, he creates shots that are poster worthy almost every frame. Like if you do a freeze frame on any of his movies, there's a beautiful image there. But the problem is that he went in with the idea that Superman was a character that needed to be fixed. Yeah. So the adaptive philosophy for him was to take things that are recognizable to placate people like me who want to see that updated vision of the comic book Superman that John Byrne created in 1986. But he also seemed to have a personal directive to push Superman to quote-unquote modernize him, and it was that push that lost kind of the essence of who Superman is supposed to be. And
I
that's
think that was more apparent in BVS.
Definitely. The Man of Steel nudged it. BVS, that's like a Hail Mary pass. It threw it all the way down the field. But it was the beginning, and it's emblematic of Superman breaking Zod's neck. Not that there's not a precedent for that with the adaptive philosophy again. But there is something that just feels off on the feeling of Superman, and that's something that Justice League, to me at least, regained about Superman, which is why I will defend that movie pretty heavily. So, Man of Steel, it had the right idea at the script stage by taking elements of versions of Superman's origin story from Byrne, from Jeff Johns, even from Mark Waid a little bit, but it didn't combine into something that was emotionally truthful. And that's why I'm not sure how Man of Steel is going to persist in the larger minds of comic book fans 10 or 20 years down the line.
So bring up Zack Snyder, and he's a lightning rod, obviously, for DC fans. But think about this. He did probably the most truest adaptations with 300 and The Watchmen, and he follows it up with Man of Steel and BVS, which is, I think, they're more controversial because they're not adapting, like it's almost a less of an adaptation from the source material, and there's a lot of my divergence as far as you can have your opinions on if it's the characterizations on or off, but it's less adaptive, like you were saying, Chris. Like it's not taking something from a direct story. There's elements there, but like it's really like almost like the Mark Steven Johnson approach, where he's taking little bits and pieces and trying to piece together his own. Well,
especially
story.
in BVS, you've got like the Batman fighting Superman. You've got the nuke that happens. You have that. It's like right from Dark Knight Returns, where you have the nuked Superman that comes back to life, and with the sun and all
it's
that.
Also like not every character trait has equal weight in the makeup of a specific character. So. BVS, the version of Batman, even though Affleck's performance as Batman in that movie is awesome, I think. If you say, well, all I'm going to change is the fact that he kills people. That's that carries more weight in the larger scheme of things than, well, all I'm going to change is the shape of his mask. By changing a fundamental core tenet of the character's philosophy, it puts the thumb on the scale as hard as it can.
Yeah.
Which is Superman 2, where you have the whole like no one stays good in this world line.
Oh, good God!
Kind of, yeah, you know.
Well, but I see what they. But here's the thing with the whole Superman stuff. Like, I agree with Chris. like I have a certain, expectation of the character and how he should be portrayed. And I think that was at the top of the show. I was talking about when you jump into the ring and say, hey, I'm going to work with these characters, there is a bit of a responsibility as a creator that you need to know, like, hey, I'm going to work on Superman. I can't completely change who this character is and how people experience him. I feel like you have to own that. You have to go, all right, Superman needs to be this. I don't have a problem challenging the character on film, and I think he was trying to.
Right.
Like I can understand Superman being kind of like, man, dude, I can't do it. I can't do anything right. Everyone's against me, And so I understand where that line came from. Not that I love it, and not that I wanted him to say it.
But Justin, and I'm sure that you would agree with this too, that the purpose of challenging a character is to build him up,
exactly.
as opposed to
and
tearing
he didn't
him down.
get built up. That was the thing. He got crammed into the ground, and it didn't. You didn't leave Dawn of Justice thinking, oh man, you do kind of get that little, oh, Superman's going to come back, but it was like, why'd you kill him? Wait a second.
It was the exact same arguments from some of the more embedded fans, like same argument that I made after Man of Steel. Well, this is going to pay off great in the sequel.
Well, it needs to pay off great today, though.
At the end, that's the sequel. But that's the thing, right? Is that the sequel then came around, and at the end of it, the same people were saying, "Oh, this is going to pay off great in the sequel." You wait.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, what about this? And I don't hate Zack Snyder by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, me neither.
I think he's
none of us do.
In a lot of ways, he's visually inventive and even brilliant in a lot of spaces. Well, and I think that his intentions with Superman were good.
Mm-hmm.
It managed to fall short.
Yeah. Well, how about this? The reason I brought up Watchmen and 300 is, and those are pretty true adaptations. Do you think that maybe he wanted to do something different and have his own again, like,
well, there's the things that he loves. I think he loves those stories. He's been very clear. He loves the Dark Knight Returns.
Yes.
Like,
right.
When he finished Watchmen, he was pretty vocal. Like, oh, I want to do Dark Knight Returns.
He was born in the mid to late 60s, right? So he was 20 years old thereabouts when Watchmen came out, when Dark Knight Returns came out. When you reach a certain age, and I saw it all the time working behind the rack at a comic book store. That's the age, like in the middle of college, where these kinds of stories can really connect with people, and they can unlock something in your brain as far as the allegorical aims or the character aims. And I'm sure that Watchmen and DKR were those stories for him. Mm-hmm. So to him, those are what constitutes a good comic book story.
No, right. But I think because he did such close adaptations where he probably didn't have as much freedom as far as like where the characters will go and what he wants them to do and explore things he wants. I'm wondering if maybe like because he had to do like these strict, pretty accurate, adaptations, like he just wanted to take again elements but tell like, well, I want to do my own thing, like you guys, almost like going against what you guys would want. He wanted to do because he was doing these so straight ahead adaptations of Watchmen.
And that's that's the only way you could make Watchmen, right? I mean, he cut his teeth on 300 and got people's attention. You had a filmmaker like Terry Gilliam, who's not a pushover, say that Watchmen is unfilmable. Mm-hmm. And Snyder comes along with the philosophy that says, yes, it is. Just look at the pages. And that's what helped him to actually get the movie made. It was a 20-year odyssey between the publication of the book. They were trying to find an adaptation for it almost as soon as it came out in 1986. And then it wasn't until 2006 that Zack Snyder was hired. And you had like 3 directors, 4 producers, and 5 different screenwriters that all tried to make this movie happen. And he is the only one who was able to do it. And that should count for a lot. And the path forward that he saw was direct adaptation, except for the ending, which I agree with Justin, probably works better as a movie than the original.
And we should probably talk about Watchmen for a second, because I think that, like, we've been kind of harping on him a little bit with like BVS and things like that. But let's talk about Watchmen, because Watchmen, as we've all said here, is probably one of the greatest comic book to film adaptations ever. Mm-hmm. And I think we all here agree that the fact that the ending is fixed because I mean, again, I'm going to steal this from my good friend Justin Bulger. We actually talked about this today because I said we're having this conversation because my friend Justin, the whole thing started. Another thing that we were talking about was my friend Justin was watching Watchmen, and I said this is the best comic book adaptation ever. I remember I texted that to Ryan. Ryan's like, "Yeah, dude, totally." And I think whatever. And so I was talking or thinking about this, and there is like. Zack Snyder will go down as like, people a lightning rod for all these things, but really he took one of the most, challenging things and made it into, he made a director's cut, an ultimate cut that incorporates even the,
the Black Freighter,
the Black Freighter stuff. And the ultimate cut is phenomenal. And it really is, barring a few nitpicks here and there for me, like,
I got a couple, but
Ackerman is not, I think, a great Silk Spectre, but that being said, he really took this movie and he adapted it. Like, you can't get more faithful than that besides putting a giant squid at the end of the movie. I mean,
which
really,
it doesn't need, because I'm thinking if there was a giant squid at the end of this movie, that would have been goofy.
Right. But my friend Justin, and I want to bring this up really fast, is that he said, you set up the fact that he's forgot the feeling of being surprised. Mm-hmm. And when he finds out that it's based on his molecular structure. Yeah. Then his face, Credup's face, and again, Justin, like my friend, I want to give him all the credit. He brought this up to me today. I'm like, I'm stealing that. Is he said like it's beautiful the way they bring it out, like they build it up. Yeah. And now again for the comic book, the squid is more. I think it makes sense for the comic book and more of the idea.
Well, it makes sense for the medium.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But for film, when you spent this last couple hours building up this character of how he's lost his humanity. And that this thing is this one thing that happened is like a surprise that he's never surprised about. Yeah, that is phenomenal because the interference, he couldn't see the future. That's why he said, because he was using his own structure to block it out of him seeing that. Oh man, and that is so brilliant.
And that's the thing. It's like it goes back to the character. They found a new angle on it.
Yes, yeah, and that's why it improves on the actual source material. And it's almost to me is the perfect comic book adaptation. Because it improves it and it keeps all the characterization of where you need to go at the end of the film, and really,
it's informed by it. I mean, the book is in a frame of the movie. It's in the actual Watchmen book is in a frame of the movie. I mean, he stayed. I give Zack Snyder all the credit. I have no asterisks to put on what you guys have said about Watchmen because as far as a straight adaptation is concerned. Like, it flies in the face of people who say you cannot do a straight adaptation of a comic book movie and make it work. And even though it didn't get the financial attention that it probably should have, it is.
You know what? Christopher Nolan said he was too soon. He said you made this movie too soon.
Yeah. He was probably right.
Think about this.
Like all the backstory stuff, like every single issue of the story, then you have all the backstory stuff, and you have, the like the old versions of Night Owl and stuff like that, and since there's not time to do all that in the film, I mean that the opening of Watchmen is like one of the best things ever. Yeah. Like that is so much. That is like perfect visual storytelling, telling you all you need to know. Just watching it instead of like telling it.
Yeah, it's
and really fast too. Talk about the financial success, and I think this is where Watchmen kind of, because it's that true adaptation. If it was a hack, right? Like let's say like it was, half of it was adapted, but they had to they changed the ending, but they also adapted it, or really did it even further changes on the ending. I don't know if it'd be as beloved as it is now. I think the fact that it is that true, like it has that, again, you have the ultimate cut. It's lived on in home video because it's that of being a superhero movie. And let's be real, if it wasn't such a successful film outside for, let's say for sales for video, then why are they putting out the Ultimate Edition again in 4K like right away? Like as soon as 4K starts developing, it's out there for sale. And I think that's pretty telling that the Watchmen must do well on video for that reason. If it wasn't, then why would they put it out immediately?
Let's hope that Damon Lindelof can keep the momentum going.
And but would you guys agree to that? Am I wrong in that assessment?
No, I don't think so.
Well, no, and that's the thing. It's like in 4K, the format plus HDR. Zack Snyder's visual storytelling is perfect for that medium as well. I mean, that's why
right.
Man of Steel, BVS, Watchmen, all Zack Snyder movies are all
I
in
think
4K.
I think people keep talking about the Watchmen because I don't see when these superhero movies don't do well or they're controversial, like a Man of Steel. Like I still think to this day, Man of Steel will age the best out of a lot of superhero movies, more than a lot of Marvel films.
I agree.
I think Man of Steel will age beautifully well, and in 20 years, people will look back on it and say that was a great movie. Like I won't say Blade Runner, but it's not like that, like that level, but something like that where they're going to look back and go, man, we really misjudged that movie because that movie was really good. But whatever. But I guess for
people still debate it over and over.
Well,
so there
I
you
know
go.
that now, but with Watchmen,
I don't.
But with Watchmen, though, you don't have that. I think everyone is like, yeah, that was a pretty amazing adaptation. And we all say, like, if you liked Watchmen, the comic book, you probably really loved the Watchmen movie.
Yeah.
And I think that it's lived on, and that's why it's been successful. It's because of the true adaptation. It's because people have a fondness for it.
It's the same thing for the book. The book is...
Exactly.
I mean, there's going to be a kid who just reads Watchmen this year. He's going to wander. He's like, oh, I've heard about Watchmen, but I was like, 6, so I couldn't read it. He's ready to read Watchmen, and he's like, oh, maybe I should check the movie. I mean, I think Watchmen may be like that. Like, it's just going to be something that people discover as they get into the genre of comic books and comic book movies and the sort. I think that's exactly where it's going to be at. It's just going to be part of the experience of diving into this genre. Is like, oh, you got to watch. Like, if someone was going to get in the comic books and comic book movies, you're going to say, oh, dude, you got to watch, Spider-Man 2, Batman 89, Nolan trilogy, Avengers. You're going to give them this.
Nolan movies.
Yeah, you're going to. Yeah, I'm with you, buddy. I'm with you.
Shut up.
So,
Stop it.
Sorry, I had to add that.
me and Paul. You're like,
Yeah, that's right.
Me and you.
Well,
Batman
I
Robin.
know that this whole discussion is winding down, which is a shame because I wanted to bring up Judge Dredd.
Oh,
and we never got
why?
the chance
Dredd?
to.
Which one, Judge Dredd or Dredd?
Both of them.
Ma'am, that's a perfect example.
But is Dredd a direct? Is that an actual direct from a comic book though? Because I don't think it is it?
Dredd? Well, he's a comic book character that was.
Well,
adapted
yeah,
into a
duh.
movie.
But I'm just saying, he's not. But he's not. That story.
Yeah,
is
but
not
but
from a
Dredd
That's
Dredd
taking
is
like the essence of the character.
Dredd is the
Okay,
essence.
all right.
Judge Dredd is the hey, here's a property we want to
Okay, fair enough.
it was
It's
in
a
the
Stallone
era
vehicle.
of Tank Girl and all that other stuff. So
Sorry, Chris.
Dredd,
Go ahead.
you know.
Chris, go ahead. Sorry.
I am the law.
I am
Your
the law.
weapons.
I am the law. Hey.
That's true.
Force it and everything.
I guess if you're talking about just again adapting the straight character, the Dredd definitely nails that. Is it 2000
Oh my
AD?
God.
It's
Yeah.
it's an incredible thing.
Dredd is one of the best comic book movies I've ever seen. I have no
Super- what's
problem.
a
with
It's
that.
also one of the best 3D movies I've ever seen.
Yeah,
The use of
absolutely.
3D in
Yeah,
that movie
that's the
is
only
so
movie,
good.
It's the only 3D movie I've ever watched where I actually felt like 3D wasn't a gimmick, where it was actually part
Yeah,
of the storytelling.
it was so good.
I'll never forget. I saw that movie the last week. It was in 3D. It was I think we saw it on a Wednesday or Thursday night, and it was only playing in 3D at the time. And we went. There was like 2 other people in the theater and had these glasses on, and I remember thinking, "This is fun." It was because it was so artfully done.
Yeah.
you know. And again, like you're taking. I did feel like they got the essence of at least from the character standpoint of all that on film, but it was so beautifully artfully done. I was like, I can't believe they actually made 3D cool. Like it was actually enhanced and made it. It gave it more of a dynamic look with everything.
You're giving
with
me
all the-
flashbacks, man. Rachel and I went to see that in Linwood on opening night.
man.
Opening night. And I was worried. I was like, oh my God,
Washington deep cut.
we have to get there. We have to get there so that we can get good seats. Come on. We were running like 5 minutes late. And we
Same
walk into
way,
the
man.
theater and I walk around, where the stadium seating. So I go around the barrier to see the seats. And there were like 3 other people in the theater. I was like, "Oh my! Are you serious? Why aren't more people coming to see this?" And it just persisted. And that movie flopped so badly. And it's like it's along with The Rocketeer. I
Yeah.
think it's a comic book movie that just flopped needlessly bad.
You know what's funny?
Really
Speaking of the
good.
Rocketeer, I think the Rocketeer movie is a bit. I love his. Is his name Jake or is it Jake? Is that his name in the comic?
Jake C.
Yeah, Jake. Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
Jake. I love his characterization more in The Rocketeer than in that adaptation than the actual comic book, because I love the design and they really the movie does a great job adapting the book. Like the comic book is really solid, but I love he's more of a smart aleck in the comic book. He's more like Ryan Reynolds. And honestly, it's really surreal. Like Ryan Reynolds should have played like the Rocketeer. He would have been, that would have been 100% true, faithful. But the character was more of a do-gooder, like stand-up dude in the adaptation. And I thought that actually was a better thing. But besides that, it's almost like verbatim from the comic. It's really like crazy how like faithful it is.
Beautiful thing to behold.
Yes, it is.
Have you ever seen Tank Girl?
No, I refuse to see that movie.
Really? Why?
Terrible.
That's a hard line right there. No.
Because it looked, even as a kid, it's Ice-T as a kangaroo thing. I'm not watching that.
Yeah, it's part of that. It's part of that comic book movie adaptation of the 90s with Judge Dredd. You had Tank Girl. You had The Mask. You had
Steel.
No, not Steel. You kind of had these like they were going after these other properties that weren't really well known. And it was a funny time because right now is the golden age of comic book superhero movies, but in the 90s there was this weird like, well, let's try some stuff. They were
not straight superheroes or whatever.
Not straight superheroes, but they were trying to get in there and like, well, what should we try? Like, I'm still waiting for my Madman movie. I'm like, come on, like. That's been Paul Rodriguez was or Robert not Paul that would be different. Robert Rodriguez was he's been circling that movie for decades now, and I'm like, I want to see that movie. I get excited about comic book movies because I love comic books so much, and I do like to share it. That's the easiest way to share comic books is with movies.
That's a great point. Yeah.
You know, like, hey, you want to give the genre a chance? Watch this. This film that you just watched that you love. You got to read the comics. I just gave one of my buddies Batman 51 through 53 because he's an arty guy. He's poetic and stuff. I'm like, you might like these three issues. Just read them. I think you might enjoy them. And it's because of people's familiarity with the films and stuff. Sometimes it might give them a chance. I'm not expecting them to deep dive. To be a Wednesday warrior with me, but I am wanting them to like maybe check some other stuff out. I think The Walking Dead, it's a TV show, doesn't count, but it did a good job of bringing people into the comic store. Like Walking Dead graphic novels shot up through the roof because people are like, oh, I like this show. Now that's another great example of adaptation and not being an exact copy.
Oh my lord!
Yeah,
right?
Especially as the seasons get on, further on along.
But I mean, that's a whole other route. But I think it did a good job for comics, especially the medium, because it sold comic books and it brought people in the stores. And that's what. In the end, that's what you want was one of these movies. Is
as fans of the genre,
it's goodwill. Yeah. It's goodwill to, hey, I'm gonna take my wife to see this because it's fun talking about it with people. At work it happens all the time. Like, wait, so what's going on with this? And
well, you brought up a great point, Justin. Like the fact that you could give this. If they like Batman Begins, a great example, right? Well, you should read Year One and Long Halloween.
Yeah.
Like again, and if you like that stuff, you might like that. If you really love The Dark Knight and things like that, or whatever, right? I mean, I think that you nailed it right there. I think that's what it's so fun about when they adapt so many different aspects of these characters, because you get to show people, this is why I love this character.
Yeah,
and they go, oh, I get it, because I don't like I'll never forget one of my really good friends. He's a big novel reader guy, but he's a novel reader guy. Well, right, but he doesn't read comics. He thinks I get confused reading comics. Because I don't know if I should go up, down. I'm like, man, you go get it. It's not that hard. But but at the same time, there's people that just can't connect to the medium. But again, you can connect with it through film, and you can show people. Like I know people used to never understand my love of comic books when I was a kid. Because again, they were very nerdy and they're blah blah blah. Now they're the biggest things and ever, and that everyone loves them and goes sees them and whatever. But and again,
that's why Batman Begins was so great, is because that is the perfect example. Is why do you like Batman? Then I can finally be like, watch Batman Begins, then that'll tell you.
And The Dark Knight,
and The Dark Knight,
watch those two movies,
and the third one, damn it.
No, you can avoid that one. You can skip that one altogether.
Oh,
you know,
good Lord.
but
That's gonna you're all worried about pissing off Batman fans. Yeah, that's gonna go over really well.
I feel like the Dark Knight Rises has actually lost fans as it's gotten gone on.
I think so.
Opposite impression.
I think it has totally. I've seen a shift.
I think it's aged very well.
No, maybe the move for you it's aged.
There's
really well,
split. There's a split, but I don't think it's as big as you think it is.
No,
maybe not. And,
especially if
Hey,
you
Paul,
love
talk to me after the show.
Yeah. How about this? Talk to me when Nolan can do a faithful adaptation of Robin. But anyway,
gosh, we don't have time
because
for that.
that's what the movie lives and dies by. Right? Is the opinion
well, it does
of
when they have him become like replace Commissioner Gordon basically, and be like, you set him up to be the next Batman.
Is Commissioner Gordon?
It's like we want to make this character Robin.
I want to watch
Did
Paul's
you watch
version
the
of this
movie? Yeah, I mean, did you see the same movie?
Wait, what happens? Wait, hold on a second. What happens when Gordon goes to the hospital? You've got the guy.
He
makes him a detective.
Yeah, exactly.
Detective
And he becomes
son.
a detective, and he becomes like basically like
He goes from beat cop to hothead to detective.
yeah, and
To Robin.
he
To
reports and he reports to Gordon, so he becomes like the Gordon essentially. He's like his eyes and
Okay.
ears.
He does not become the police
I don't know
commissioner.
if you
He
quite,
doesn't become the commissioner, but he becomes like his informant.
the hierarchy. I don't think it quite works that way. But
No, I know it doesn't work that way. Hold on.
respect your
For the
interpretation.
record,
Joseph
real-
Gordon-Levitt is
Hold
the
on.
Gordon.
No, hold on. What I'm trying to say
Joseph
is
Gordon.
that you know how Gordon was on. He was
I didn't even
was
think
on
about
the
that.
field with Batman in the first and the second one. When he becomes
Gordon on
hobbled,
Gordon.
he becomes essentially the Gordon of the third film. That's what I'm saying.
Until
Gordon becomes the Gordon of the third film.
No, he's not.
You remember?
Because he remember he has that whole thing where he's like talking to Batman in the hospital bed and he can't move. He's like,
Hey, do you remember at the end when he like helps stop the bomb?
That's right. I
and
forgot.
he like
You're right.
he
Been a
climbs
while.
in the bomb at the
Okay.
end of the
he
It's
movie.
been
faces
a
down the
while.
scarecrow in court.
I forgot. I got bored.
Yeah.
Never mind.
He's like-
Okay.
He lights it up. Batman's like, light it up, and he's like, lights it
that's
up,
right.
and then
Bruce Wayne.
he there's
you
like
what.
the Daredevil flames.
Paul,
and
you
bats
love movies in 4K. Few movies in 4K look quite as good as The Dark Knight Rises.
I will be
Do
watching
yourself
The
a
Dark
favor.
Knight.
That is
Yeah.
absolutely the
Dark Knight Rises
case. Those
again.
IMAX scenes, holy
asking
shit,
for it for
it looks so
Christmas.
good.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right.
Talk about adaptation. That they had that Nightfall scene where Bane breaks Batman's back, and that shocked me so much.
Yeah, that's
That-
a
That
good,
was
that's a great scene.
I will agree. That was probably the best part of the movie.
That
Yeah.
was beautifully adapted from Batman 497 too. Like
Yeah.
the
Yes.
actual spirit of the fight.
Yeah.
That's
The
something
spirit of the fight. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
even if it may not have gone down exactly the same way. First of all, it ended the same way,
Yeah.
and the actual
Yeah.
emotion of holy crap, he's not winning. He's
Yeah.
not
You know,
going
that's
to
a good
win.
point. I've always said I've liked the first half.
It's
of that
like a
movie.
microcosm of that comic book, right? Where
Yeah.
like Batman, like when Batman goes up against him, that like he's going to lose.
Yeah.
But Batman doesn't know it yet. But then Batman figures it out as
Well,
the thing goes
and there
along.
you go.
The desperation of it. Yeah.
We were having this conversation on a text thread earlier, and one of the things about adaptation is we know Batman is going to get his back broken. It's how they go about it, because it was still visceral. It was really intense. Like you still felt those punches, right? That's your hero. We were talking about Infinity War today, and my argument is we know Spider-Man's coming back because he makes $1 billion, right? He's a profitable property. It is the experience of the characters as well that matters. It still hurts.
Yeah.
When those
Yeah.
characters
Yes.
go away, we know they're coming back. We know some of them are coming back, but it's still like, oh dang, like Tony and Spider-Man, when they have their experience on Titan, man, that it's heart wrenching.
Yeah.
You
It's
feel
rough.
it.
Yeah.
We know Spider-Man's filming a movie right now,
Yeah.
but it didn't
Right.
take away from the emotional impact of that scene.
Well,
And
And it's true of characters that
Yes.
end up getting rebooted or recast in the future, because we knew that Batman would be back after The Dark Knight Rises.
yeah,
But maybe for some of us more than others, there was still the emotional weight of what this ending looked like for this version of the character.
yeah.
You
And
know,
regardless of what you thought of it, it still gave you an emotion.
Yeah.
You know,
absolutely.
like we can go jokey and jest and all that stuff, but like in the end, it made you feel something. You're like, oh man, I don't know if I like that, or oh, I did like that, or and anyways,
Or I felt for Batman. Or yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
so
Well,
All right.
that we went around the world a few times, I think.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, we did.
Paul, well done
Yeah.
on the subject matter.
Thank you.
We adapted your Twitter thread well, did we?
Oh man, you guys!
I think we did.
You guys Watchmened it. You know what I mean?
Watchmened.
I think we can, yeah.
We Snydered it, man. We Snydered that.
We
thing,
did
dude.
not. We killed it with the kryptonite spirit.
Oh, we Snydered it.
Maybe we'll have to do the Justice League version follow up of this.
Before we leave, should we tease the next episode
Yes.
or the next thing?
Yeah.
The next thing, yeah. Yeah, like just going off of this whole adaptation thing. Another thing that we've been talking about is
world.
yeah, like we've talked about some of these animated adaptations in this conversation, like The Dark Knight Returns in Year One, and another one that's really interesting to look at from a lot of different perspectives is Batman Under the Red Hood, where Jason Todd comes back as the Red Hood, and that animated film is very good. That's probably in the top 5 Batman animated movies or something, probably. And that's a really interesting thing to look at because the film is good, but it's based on, of course, an arc in Batman comics, and
A good chunk of comics too, by the way. Not just like 4 issues. It's like 12, 13 issues.
It's quite hefty, and there's a lot that goes into that, and there's a lot of things that they change between the two, and there's some comic booky things that happen in the comic books, for lack of a better word, and it's interesting to compare and contrast the two and see which one comes out ahead. So we're gonna do a show on that.
Yay!
I'm excited for that. That's good comics. That's good comics from something that I didn't think was going to be a good comic.
I think you guys have to.
It took me a while to warm up to it, to be honest.
Well, I want to spoil the conversation because there's hefty stuff we can talk about this whole thing with Jason Todd. So I'm excited, and I'm assuming it's gonna be the same 4 with Mr. Clow joining us. So I mean, I know Clow has a lot to say about it as well.
I'd be honored. You
Oh
guys know
man,
where to find me.
And we still need to do our the Man of Steel wrap up.
Oh, yeah.
I want to talk about that.
Oh man,
We've been talking about that for a while too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that movie, guys.
No, we're
No.
Dude,
Sorry,
Bendis Superman.
Bendis Superman.
Oh, I'm out. See ya.
Biggest Bendis fan I know, and he's out for Superman.
Because I can't. Yeah,
It's just like his novel rule.
yeah. I
Oh,
don't
we just wrote a DC comic. I can't do it.
DC Bendis can't do it. Sorry.
Oh, come on, man.
Who are
I'm
you?
kidding. I'm gonna eventually read it.
Don't be
All
that
right.
guy.
Yeah, man. Be a guy, but don't be that guy. Cool.
Beautiful.
Okay,
All right, Ryan.
let's do some plugs. Let's have Chris plug
Oh, okay.
some Chris things.
Feel free to find me on Twitter at Chris Clow, ChrisClow. Just put out a new episode of my Star Trek podcast, Discovery Debrief, talking about the Season 2 trailer that just dropped at Comic-Con for Star Trek Discovery Season 2. And I'm currently working on the new issue of Comics on Consoles, my video game podcast having to do with comics characters. I'm targeting September 7th for issue number 11 that focuses on the 2000 Spider-Man game, because that's the day that the PS4 Spider-Man game comes out. So we will see what happens. I'm working diligently. Hopefully, I'll get it done in time.
It'll be a doozy of an episode.
Is it Spider-Man or Spider-Man 2 game where the little girl's like, my balloon?
Oh, that's Spider-Man 2. Yeah.
Okay.
The movie game.
Yeah.
This is the Neversoft game that came out on the PS1,
The original.
Dreamcast, and
N64.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very important kind of foundational game in comic book gaming history. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, cool. What about you, Paul? Plug.
I got stuff. No, you can find me on Twitter at Herman22 with 2 N's, aka P Thug. But for the record, I had someone recently ask me, "What do they call you, P Thug?" And I said, my old bass player called me P Thug as a joke, and he made me like a rap album cover with some ridiculous titles.
Oh, is that what your Twitter header was?
Yeah, that's what it was. That was when I was 22 years old, man. So if people think that I'm trying to have send a message with that, it's literally just it's nothing and whatever. Chill out if you have a problem with it. But anyway, but yeah, so you can find me on there on Twitter. I have a couple podcasts I'm on. Marvel Newscast with Sean Gerber. We just break down all things Marvel. We have a really cool Patreon right now that we're doing deep dives into comic books, which is more my jam. So and I'm biased because I love talking about comic books, so I think they're worth it. So definitely look into those. And I'm also on a couple Star Wars podcasts. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I've been on a couple of these shows with Rick regarding that. But yeah, you can find me on Blaster Canon podcast. That's Canon CANON. And also the saga continues with my good friends Tim and Kyle. You can find that on Twitter and on iTunes. The saga continues. It's a great podcast. I love working with those guys. But yeah, check me out on there.
Nice. Really
Awesome.
is. Those
Awesome.
guys are all awesome, and they
Yes.
all put out a great Star Wars show.
Yeah. Justin, plug.
I just want to plug
Justin, plug.
Seth Rollins from SummerSlam tonight. Rocked a Thanos outfit. And there you go. No spoilers on that. I just wanted to give a shout out to Seth Rollins for just claiming style. Gold and purple are always a great ensemble. So yeah, you can follow me at J_Rocka on Twitter. And if you would like to check out the Let's Go podcast or the Let's Go comic show, visit www.letsgopodcast.com to check those things out.
Justin, can I complain for a second?
Please.
Why don't you ever have me on Let's Go Comic Show?
I would,
Or me. He promised me like a year ago.
I know. What the heck?
I would
dude?
love to. It's a weird thing, man, because we record like Wednesdays really late, and right now it's been like you ever listen to your show and you're like, man, we sound really tired at the end.
I never listen to my show.
Oh my gosh, I do, and I'm like, oh my
That's
gosh,
another one of your little rules.
we're getting so tired, and and I thought there was going to be some down weeks because my co-host Matt just had twins, so he has like 5 kids now, and I was like, man, I'm gonna plug some of my buddies in here, and he's actually, dude, his wife is amazing. She's like, no, go record, and I'm like, you have 5 kids. Anyways, little background on the show. I need to figure out a way to get you guys on it, and so it will happen. It's this hard when like
I just want to give you a hard time. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No. Hey, it's cool. I don't mind.
sorry.
I don't mind peeling the curtain back a little bit. I would love to.
No, I just love comics, and I know me and Ryan are like, well, come on, man.
Ryan's been on before. Ryan was on like episode.
I was
7
on one time.
or something like that. So
Well, I have me on any time, so I don't like that.
I would love to. Maybe we'll do the Superman show there. How about that?
Hey.
Hey, how about that? Oh, this is sweeting the
I don't
deal
pick
there.
Superman, so I'm screwed.
Take that, Bill.
Yeah, take that, Bill. Aw.
I'm still waiting on confirmation about whether or not Rick Shu has actually read comic books.
Oh, he does.
He doesn't read comics.
He has read some. He's been reading all those Tim Drake comics.
He said he would read
has.
these.
He loves Batman Adventures, I heard.
He said.
Hey,
I like
Batman
those.
Adventures is really good.
I
He
really
said
like
he
those.
No,
would
I
read
know,
the
but it's because he
Superman
loves
stuff.
the animated series. That's what he
Oh,
loves.
I don't know if he's reading those Superman books.
He said he would. Man,
He
he
said he
told me.
would.
We'll see.
He told me he would.
He said he would. We need to bug him
If
some
we
more.
go
Yeah.
back far
We're
enough,
supposed to do a White Knight show in October too.
all of
Yeah,
Yes.
remember that?
We are. We're waiting for the trade. We're waiting for the trade.
Fair
Yeah.
enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So
Cool.
relax, calm down.
Rick, read those Superman comics.
Right.
Be
Yeah, well, he won't listen to this episode either. So
Yeah.
son of a bitch.
he will.
No, he will.
I'm-
Because he'll usually text and go, "Oh man, that show was great."
Except for that part where you made fun of me at the
Yeah.
end.
Oh.
Why'd you do that?
Rick, we love you, man.
We do
Yeah,
love you, Rick.
we love you, bro.
We want you
Rick
to read
is
more
the best.
comics.
He's
That's
awesome.
all.
I love
Yeah.
Rick. Rick is like such an easy punching bag, but it's all in love.
Oh, yeah.
It's all in love. It's
Yes,
like
absolutely.
He
there's
knows
always,
it,
Yeah,
too.
there's
He
always
knows it,
one
yeah.
guy, like he's like your buddy, but he's also like, oh, we can rib him a little more because he's got a lot of ribs. So there you go. He's the McRib.
It's
He's the Rick rib.
He's the
Rick Rib.
He's the Rick rib.
Unconditional love to Rick, though. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
He's a good dude. He cooked me steak, so
Yeah.
there we go.
Hey.
Yeah. All right.
All right, Ryan.
Follow me on Twitter at SMB_Ryan. And we have a brand new episode of the Robin Everyone Loves Drake podcast coming out this Wednesday.
Yeah.
It's a good little episode. I think we talk about Robin plus Impulse.
Oh
which
my
is kind of
gosh, I have that.
Yeah, we pulled that one out because
Jeez.
we were going to talk about this really good King Snake 3-issue arc. Then I got like super sick, and then the other guys had to record without me, and I do the intro. So
Are there
there's that.
Are there any major instances where Tim Drake took on Blockbuster by himself?
Oh wow,
Ooh,
that's a deep pool right there.
That's a deep pull. We'll have to ask. You'll have to ask the experts on that one. Rob or Terrence might know that one.
Okay.
I can't think of a
I'm not
single.
sure.
What about the Cyber Rats? Remember when he teamed up with the Cyber
Oh
Rats?
God! Wow.
Oh,
I never
That's a
thought
pull.
after I closed that page, I never thought I would hear that
The
word
Cyber
again.
Rats.
That's incredible.
That
You know
was
who
Bloodlines,
loves-
right?
Yeah, totally. You know who loves Drake now?
Oh, who loves Drake?
Paul Herman. Paul Herman.
Oh yeah,
He
yeah.
does.
He
He's
was
been
into
reading.
it.
You've been reading the trades too. Those trades have been so good.
Yeah.
Because they put all the Tim Drake stuff like in order in the trades.
Yeah, Chuck Dixon, dude. He just there's another like as you were talking earlier, Chris, about like who has written Damien well. It's like I'm thinking Chuck Dixon was
with Tim Drake.
Tim Drake, you know, he just did such a great job. So
Also an underrated Punisher writer.
Oh yeah, he had a
Oh,
run on
for
Punisher.
sure.
Yeah.
And his GI, I
He's
loved
written
his
like
GI Joe.
more comics than like 99% of comics writers
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
He's written everything. So all right,
And you can listen to us interview him a few episodes back.
there you
That
go.
was great. That was a great
yeah.
episode. I love that.
Yeah,
episode.
that was fun.
Yeah. That was a blood, sweat, and tears episode too. Like that Nightfall interview. That was good. That was good stuff, man.
Very cool.
Shout out to Chuck Dixon. How you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Call him Chucky D.
All right, Chucky D. Well, that wraps up today's episode. For Justin, Chris, and Paul, I am Ryan. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Hey now! You've been listening to the Batman on Film podcast, a proud member and the sponsor of the Batman Podcast Network, BatmanPodcastNetwork.com. You can listen to the BOF podcast on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play Music, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, TuneIn, and wherever good podcasts like this one can be found. Want to advertise on the BOF podcast? Go to advertisecast.com/the Batman on Film Con podcast. Follow Jet on Twitter at Batman on Film and on BOF's Facebook fan page at facebook.com/jet.batmanonfilm. Email Jet via jet@batman-on-film.com. For Justin and Ryan, I'm announcer Rachel. Thanks for listening.